by saying congratulations on such an amazing film. I watched it yesterday, and I have to say it had me in tears at times, it had me happy at other times, but congratulations on such a beautiful and emotional film.
Oh, thank you
so much.
Always love to make somebody cry.
So tell us a little bit about the journey of this film. Where did it all start for both of you?
It started, I guess there's been a couple of starts for me. When I read the book, which was not long after it had been published in, I think 1992, I think too. I was really struck by that book, and Patricia Grace, the author, was back then my mother-in-law, and so I had a relationship with her and was privy to the conversations that her and a really well-known Māori woman filmmaker, Mera Tamita, had around the adaptation of the novel to the screen. And then later, after Merita passed and the film wasn't made, she was never able to get the funding for it, which was unfortunate because they in between them wrote some beautiful scripts. I realised that it had been languishing for quite some time, so I made contact with Ainsley, who's of course a producer among other things, about the possibility of her picking it up. She had already been thinking about that, and then about a year later she kept asking me if I knew of anyone that could write it, and I kept saying no, and it was because I wanted to write it. And then about a year later I said, would you mind if I wrote it? And she said, yeah, well, I wanted to ask you, but you didn't seem to want to do it, etc.
Ridiculous, that kind of hyper polite kind of Kiwi thing where I didn't want to put her out and she didn't want to impose on me. So, and Merita had been a mentor to both of us over the years, and as Briar said, when she passed away, she had some projects that she had been working on that as a producer I had felt quite a strong responsibility to get some of those made, and Cousins was certainly the one that she would have loved to have made. So it made a lot of sense. I read the book in my 20s. I was really struck at that time. It was the first piece of literature I'd read that had Māori women front and centre, not just one, but dozens. The author's a really poetic writer, and even though I probably didn't think it at the time, it is an incredibly cinematic novel, and so there's just all of this texture and colour in it that when we went back to it as filmmakers, that it was just a really obvious choice for an adaptation. Yeah, and in terms of coming to it as directors, we kind of, in that similarly sort of hyper polite way, we struggled for a while working out who would direct it, and I sort of had this feeling that there weren't any Māori women experienced enough to take it on, and then we did a project together as writer-directors called Waru, a portmanteau film, where each of us wrote and directed, 9 Māori women wrote and directed a short film, kind of like a 5 obstructions exercise, where we were given this framework to make a story around that centred around the death of a child from child abuse, grim subject. And so at that point I kind of had to acknowledge how ignorant I had been prior to that, and that not only was there at least one Māori woman who could direct Cousins, there were at least 9, and those 9 were chosen out of a pool of dozens, and actually that Briar and I were among those people. So I think maybe Briar came to that sooner than I did, but there was something about the multi-narrative nature of it as well, the fact that it was about a community and it was about a number of different women from different perspectives that really asked for co-direction.
And how did you find that process of turning the novel into a script? Because I'm in the middle of doing that at the moment, where I'm turning a novel into a television series. And at times it becomes really difficult because there is so much more in a novel that you want to include in there. But of course, you've got the problem of time and things like that. How difficult was that for you both to to go into that and turn such an important novel into a screenplay?
I was really aware of by hanging out with the author and Merata Mita, who were originally adapting the novel to a screenplay, just being privy to their conversations that they had, the usual problems of they were grappling with many characters and many time zones and many locations and all of that. I knew that early on I had to be quite brutal in terms of what I would take or leave. So I read the book 3 times. I got to know it really well, and that story kind of really well, in a way that I was able to kind of do my thing with it without, I guess, changing the spirit of it. So while it's quite different from the book, I hope that we've managed to retain, the essence of what the book is, Cousins. Yeah.
Briar always does talk about that. That's the key to the adaptation, is retaining the essence and not necessarily being bound by the content. But the thing about Cousins is because it's got so many. You barely went back to the book though after that.
I barely went back.
And the thing is that because it's just such a huge collection of moments, things stick in your mind. And when I read Briar's adaptation, the things that stuck in her mind that she brought to the script were the things that stuck in my mind too. So like the marble is only mentioned a couple of times in the novel, but it's so impactful and significant that it belongs in the film. So there are just these, I think Briar captured all of the moments which, at least for me, and obviously for you, were the moments that captured the imagination most, the most kind of painful, the most funny, the most tender, and then all of those moments are the ones that stayed in the film.
Definitely. We mentioned before about there's a beauty to this film as well, and it really helped that you were filming in the most beautiful country in the world, but how important was it to you both to get that beauty, and also how did that change the way that you went about location scouting, because there's some amazing shots that you managed to get here just with the scenery alone?
So part of the location thing was that we got tribal money from one of my tribal organisations, which one of the requirements they had was that we had to shoot in that tribal area. Thankfully, that tribal area was the Rotorua, the Lakes region, a geothermal region in the Bay of Plenty. So we were obviously spoiled for choice as far as locations within that region. As I say, it's a lakes region. It has hot rivers, beautiful native forest, old magnificent native trees, beautiful old meeting houses. And so in that regard, it was kind of easy to find those shots. But also, like, we did some work quite early on with a painter called Star Gossard. She's a Maori woman, beautiful artwork, and we went to Story Camp, which is a script development workshop, I suppose, and she was one of our mentors over the course of the week, and she kind of reminded us in a funny way. When I read the book and when I read Merata's version of the script, I was reminded of a painting, and the way in which a painting is kind of rich with detail, but it's also rich with this kind of the overall impression, and where, depending on where you stand, you get a different experience of it. So Star was quite influential in asking us as directors to find the painterly elements of the story. So I think that was pretty influential early on.
You also put together an amazing cast. The cast was just absolutely sensational, but you also have that bit in there where you have to try and find people who look like each other over generations. Did that change any of the casting choices that you had to make, or did it make the casting process that little bit more difficult?
Yeah, well, what we started out with, we auditioned many many women. We weren't spoilt for choice, and many children. In terms of the adults, we worked out early on who we really wanted, and they were the Anna Scott Neves. She plays the teenage or Mata in her early 20s, the one that works in the factory, and Rachel House. So people like them, and we built the rest of the cast around them. And in the end, it was more a spiritual essence similarity between characters between women playing the same characters that was more important than the way people looked, because you can put you can dye someone's hair red, or you can make the physical resemblances in a way. I mean, it's important to some degree, but in the end it was more of we cast around a kind of a spiritual common a way of being in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
The actors had it in common.
And you probably know Briar ended up in the film as well. We had originally cast in that role. You might recognise her from such films as Cousins. We had cast Nancy Brunning, who was one of our kind of most senior and wonderful actors, and she was really ill, and we kind of Briar had sort of worked on the script. We just kept holding on to her in that role and trying to work out how we would make it with her, how we would write her illness even more significantly into the script. She was wheelchair bound. But a couple of weeks out, we realised it was too much for her, and she realised it was too much for her. So 2 weeks out, we were left with the task of recasting Nan, and Briar sort of tongue-in-cheek put her hand up, and and then we ended up casting her. But what that did when we cast Briar was that the two next level down actors who we had cast and done their costume fittings, and they had done some rehearsals and really had attached themselves to their characters, they didn't energetically fit anymore. So the one that was cast as the younger Makareta no longer fit with Briar, so we had to do the old switcheroo a week out.
Wow.
So you can kind of see that those two women who play the one who runs away from the betrothal and the one who stands up at the betrothal, they were originally cast in the opposite direction. So that kind of the finding, in a funny way, it wasn't as hard as you would imagine to cast, and we probably could have put it together in a number of different ways with a number of different actors. It wasn't easy to swap them, but it made sense to do so because we were trying to be really truthful to that energetic element.
And now I know we're running out of time very, very quickly, so I'll finish with this question. The film is such an emotional journey for its audience. Was it an emotional journey as well for the cast and for everybody on set as well? Because I could imagine that the script readings and the rehearsals and actual takes would have been quite emotionally draining as well. What was that like for everybody that was involved?
I can speak for the actors because I was kind of in those shoes. It was really emotional. Like, people were really connecting strongly to their characters and the journey that they were going through. Tanya Heki, for example, who plays the older Mata, the homeless woman, she walked in and burst into tears before the audition. So it was full of that kind of, it's not a bad thing, crying is quite cathartic. It was more those kinds of tears and like, this is terrible. And also real highs. It was an emotional journey and a lot of fun as well, because our nature inherently as Māori is to take the piss, and when things are hard, we joke about it. So there was a lot of laughter on set as well.
Yeah, and I think because everyone was aware of the significance of it, it was an incredibly buoyant, supportive community of filmmakers, really conscious and aware of how privileged we all were to be telling the story, how privileged we all were to be telling the story together, and the significance of the journey that had gone before us. So yeah, but I think that's what it is to be Indigenous, is to carry a lot of weight and responsibility, but also to really relish and enjoy the spirit of the process. Hey, and just so you know, Dave, we've got more time. You may not, but we've got another 15 minutes if you wanted.
Oh, okay.
To talk.
Yeah, definitely. I was told that it was going to end at 10:20, so yeah, I was trying to wrap it up.
Well, we've got 10:30 on our schedule, so up to you. But we're good to go for another 10 to 15 minutes anyway.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'll ask one more question. I had one really important question I wanted to ask. This is such an important film that I feel that everybody out there should go and see this film. How important was it for both of you to make this film, and how important do you think that it is for the wider Maori community as well, that this film is out there for people to go along and watch and experience?
Yeah, I can talk to kind of one aspect of that, and I know Ainsley will. There's so many reasons why it's important. One of them is because we had a 30-year break. We had Merita Mita, who was our celebrated Māori woman writer director, and there was 30 years between the last feature she made and the next feature by written and directed by Māori woman, and that feature was Waru, which is an omnibus film, which is 8 shorts connected by a common theme that kind of makes a whole. And then now there's Cousins, and the kind of when you're devoid of that perspective or worldview, it's like a drought, and you don't realise how important it is to see the faces that reflect yours until you see them. And so, seeing this film, Cousins, for many of our people, which comes from the perspective of Māori woman and shows many, many Māori women on screen, is incredibly important, because it validates you, makes you feel like you're part of the world. It's kind of a huge thing. So in that way, it's important. And the other way is that it makes it possible and it makes it normal for other women of colour to believe that they can tell their stories as well, and for the funders to go, this film did well, we're not taking so much of a risk, etc., etc. But when these things start happening and you push through, it opens the ground for others.
Yeah, there's a few things. I think one is that a lot of the films told about us, by us, but also not by us, really lock into the stereotypes, and even something like Once Warriors, that was made by a Māori man, sticks in people's minds and gives people an impression of who and what we are. And I think you'll find, like in Cousins, one of the things that I was most proud about is the gentle way that it treated our men and portrayed them as, loving husbands and supportive men, and men trying to do the right thing, because we don't see much of that on the screens. But that's the real experience of being Māori, is our fathers and our sons and our brothers are like that, not like Once Warriors. Once Warriors absolutely exists and is a perspective there, but we see too much of that and not enough of the opposite. And in that way, it's also really, really important for a non-Indigenous audience, and I think it'll resonate here in Australia with both your Indigenous audience and non, because it just opens the kind of viewers, when you deal with something which is really full of tragedy. It's essentially a story about colonisation and loss. When you're dealing with all of that kind of difficult political stuff, it can be really alienating to a non-Indigenous audience to confront those things. And if you deal with it in a particular way, that's also full of connection and the sort of what it is to be part of a family and to belong somewhere, then you're able to resonate more deeply with a non-Indigenous audience, and hopefully they're able to start to see things like colonisation and why are the way that they are in a more kind of empathetic light, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important about Cousins. When I was watching Cousins, I kept on going back to the first time I'd seen Samson and Delilah here in Australia, or Rabbit Proof Fence, and those two films, I think, educated more Australians about what Indigenous Australians had been through over the years and what they were going through now than anything else that we'd ever seen before. And I think Cousins is going to do the same thing both here in Australia and also in New Zealand as well. Was that something that was on your mind when you actually sat down to work on this film?
It wasn't on our mind, but I think just by the nature of the story and the characters that it's something that I think we really hoped would happen. But I guess we try not to think too much about, just trying to immerse ourselves in telling a good story and being really close to the characters. And I think one of the special things about Cousins and the film you mentioned is that you grow to love the characters, and in loving the characters opens you up to the kind of wider things that are at play, the wider issues.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is to be an Indigenous filmmaker anyway, is that you carry a lot of responsibility. You're always, regardless of what you decide to tell a story about, you're always going to be part of the conversation in terms of what am I doing to redress the balance for and on behalf of my people or my family or my community. So that stuff's just inherent. We just carry that all the time. So in a practical way, the conversations don't have to revolve around that, because that's what we're geared towards naturally. And as Briar said, we can just have the great fun experience of being filmmakers trying to make a beautiful film that connects with people and makes them cry and makes them laugh.
Yeah, well, you certainly both did that. And I guess to finish up, what would you like to say to Australians out there before they go to see Cousins? Because Australia and New Zealand has such a special relationship, and I think it's got stronger over the last 12 months with what we've been through. So what would you like to say to Aussies out there before they go to see Cousins in cinemas?
Yeah, so I guess for me it's that thing, I've said this a few times now, but we do often focus on our rivalry and our differences, and I think something like Cousins, and in fact our cinema and Australian cinema, is what it's great for is kind of showing us our similarities and the ways in which we are the same, and the ways in which our struggles have been similar, and the ways in which we can kind of be kin to one another. So I just hope that it feels like, because this is a film that for us is first and foremost for Māori, about Māori, but I hope that for Australians they can, see themselves in the picture too.
I don't have anything to add to that, but I would like to say they might want to bring tissues, because it has been proven that
danger can make you cry.
Definitely. Well, Ainsley, Briar, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And again, congratulations on such an amazing, beautiful and emotional film.
Thanks, Dave. And I really hope you guys come out of lockdown soon and are able to go and see it. And I hope you recover from your flu.
Definitely. Well, I'm just glad that I got through this without a coughing fit, because yesterday was terrible. So.